well. Uh, Let me just start by giving a little overview of where we are in the big process and then talk about what we're going to try to accomplish today. And uh, this is really kind of a critical time in our planning process. And your input today is going to be really valuable as we start making some very important decisions. So we talked about in our past meetings this 5-stage planning process that we're undertaking. The first stage was identifying opportunities and constraints, gathering information, interviewing key people, and really laying the foundation for the detailed planning. We then got into stage 2, which was to develop the 3 planning concepts that we showed to you last time. And those were exploring a kind of a range of different areas of focus and geographical catchment areas for the planning. And we'll talk about those a little bit. Since then, our planning team has gone through and established about 25 different categories of objectives, criteria against which we're evaluating these various concepts. And so they've done that, and we're going to share that with you today so you can see how those different concepts perform relative to each other. This step now is to go from those concepts to narrowing into a preferred alternative, kind of the platform that we'll use for the balance of the work that we do in developing a master plan for the site. So as I said, it's kind of a critical time, and your input is going to be really valuable. We're going to start meeting with the board in the next couple of weeks to do some work sessions and bring them up to speed, share with them the recommendations from these working groups. And we intend that at our next regularly scheduled board meeting on April 13th, they'll be able to set a direction for stage 4, which is kind of taking that locally preferred, agreed upon alternative and working to optimize it. What changes need to be made, what things can be added to the planning to make sure that we achieve the broad vision that we have. And then the 5th stage is developing the master plan and supporting documents. So as you can see, we're kind of right in that critical spot. And today we'll have our planning team just bring you up to speed on what's happened since we met last time, share with you the evaluation of the planning concepts relative to those planning criteria. And then finally, getting your input on, well, a couple of things. One will be on the urban framework that we've set out. We'll ask for your advice and guidance on what you liked in each of those concepts. And maybe just as a reminder, we're not asking you to pick a concept. We're asking you to identify what elements of those concepts ought to be carried forward. What do you like? What don't you like? What should move on to this preferred alternative? And then we'll take the next step from another exercise we did last time, which was taking the key vision elements that you've outlined and looking at the initiatives that support those elements and seek your help in seeing if, number 1, they're complete, and number 2, helping us think through prioritization a little bit so that we're really focusing our efforts on those things you think will most create this economic engine and this innovation community that we really want to build at this site. So again, welcome you all. I also see that Commissioner Wolstenhume has joined us as one of the co-chairs. Just say, Commissioner, would you like to make any introductory comments before we move on?
Thanks, Alan. No, thanks everybody for being with us today, and I look forward to the conversation. So with that, Alan, we'll throw it back to you and so we can get going.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. You know, this is a working group that I really like. You're just deep thinkers and have been engaged, and we've received from you a lot of really great substance that I think is going to make a difference in our plan. But so at this point, with that outline, I'm going to turn it to our consulting team, the planners from SOM, and specifically Peter Kindle, who will bring us up to speed on what we've learned and done since we last met. So, Peter.
Great, thank you, Alan. Welcome everybody, and great to see everybody again. As Alan mentioned, we have passed or are in the process of moving through an important milestone in the project, which is the conclusion of stage 2, which is the development of 3 different concepts, and moving towards a consolidated master plan. So it's a really important time for us to get your input. So I'll share with you today the results of our stage 2 work. So you'll see 3 master plan concepts. I think you've probably seen the outlines of these before. Then, as Alan said, we'll share with you our evaluation process. And then the last part of the conversation would be around specific initiatives that you would like to see in the plans, whether those are things that we've already drawn and illustrated or things that we have not yet drawn but you feel are missing. So feel free to interrupt me at any time if there's a question. I'm happy to pause and answer. I'll move through the concepts fairly quickly since I think you've seen them in some form before. So we are looking at 3 development concepts. Each has a different focus and impact relative to its geographic reach. And number 1 is what we call a complete community. Number 2 is a regional hub with about a 4 to 5 mile catchment. And number 3 has the broadest geographic reach. It's really a regional idea about how to stimulate the economy in the entire Wasatch Front. A couple of key differences that you'll see as we move forward, and that's the residential and commercial proportion. So in option 1, it's 60-40 residential and 40 commercial. Option 2 or concept 2 is 50-50, so equally balanced. And in the economic catalyst concept, it's 40% residential and 60% commercial. And you'll hear more about why this is important, but I would ask you to just kind of keep that balance in mind. So the idea behind a complete community is really exactly what it is labeled as, and that's the idea of how do we best design this large site to become a self-sustaining environment and really leverage its impact on the immediate surroundings. So sort of in a 1 mile radius from the center of the site. So the formative idea in this option is to really balance land uses. So we want to have a fully mixed use community where a person's daily needs are generally met in that environment. All of the options you'll notice are approximately 15 million square feet. That's the number here at the center of the screen at the bottom. That is a metric that we've kept consistent between all 3 options. So we're really talking simply about the physical layout today and the elements in each concept, not so much the density. Option 1 has about 55% of the land devoted to developable area. It's organized into 7 districts. And what the districts allow us to do is develop different programming ideas around each district. They're organized around the hub, which is a central mixed use district. And here you can see the land use plan. So the brown is residential, the blue is office or non-residential uses. The red is retail. So as you can see, it's a fairly mixed land use strategy. And what we're anticipating for the retail hub is that it's really a environment that might look something like this, 2 to 3 stories in height, maybe a bit taller in certain areas, but it really provides this kind of focus and retail core to the center of the project, which you can see here. Each district would have a clear core, and the idea behind the core is that it provides a touch point for that district where services are provided and different retail elements are supporting the office and residential functions. So the idea is that within a 5 or so minute walk of anyone's home or workspace, they can get to basic services that allow them to live in a sort of a balanced way. We also think the mixed use hub could have certain open space components, something like this, as you see here. And we have now at the end of stage 2 begun to program the different open space ideas. And for concept 1, you can see that this is a more of a dispersed open space idea. So it's really emphasizing linear connections, pathways, movement through the project, but it still allows a certain amount of programming. This is an image of what one of those greenways might look like, what we're calling the Emerald Necklace. So it's really a way to move through the project without necessarily having to travel on roads. We have prepared a road plan for all concepts. The goal is to maximize external connectivity and reduce traffic loads on key intersections. So you see that here. The pink areas are what we're calling car-free zones. So these would be areas in the plan that are car-free and exclusively pedestrian oriented. As you all know, BRT is planned to move through the center of the site. Here you see that pathway for concept 1 with 2 stations. The yellow line is a neighborhood electrical vehicle, which would link the districts to that BRT system. So that is how you would access BRT. We also are anticipating a school in all 3 concepts. This would be a school probably K through 8 or perhaps K through 12 that serves the residential community and may also serve some of the surrounding communities as well. This is a diagram of building heights and core areas, and we anticipate the cores being 6 to 8 stories in height. The remainder of the project would be in the 3 to 4 story range. And maybe in certain points, there might even be a building that's taller if the market supports it. The BRT in this drawing is shown as the red line, and you can see how that BRT alignment would support these districts. And here you see the open spaces colored green, again with the BRT. And the regional trail connection that links the Jordan River to the Wasatch Front or the Wasatch foothills would follow this greenway that cuts through the middle of the project, and then we would link that trail over the same bridge that would carry the BRT. So that's how we would make this connection between the Jordan River and the foothill parks. Concept 2 is what we call the regional hub, and this is a broader impact concept. So looking at the surrounding communities of Draper, Bluffdale, Lehigh, and Riverton, and finding land uses that would complement and support these communities. 2 big ideas around this concept are the introduction of a larger park that would serve as a sub-regional park, and then also a sub-regional retail and entertainment component. So we do have a higher percentage in this option of retail, food and beverage, which you can see over here on the left, and a hotel component. That would be about 40 acres for those 2 uses. The physical design of this concept is different than concept 1. You can see that regional trail connection moving right through the middle of the project. Again, linking over I-15 and then connecting to Jordan River. But the remainder of the development area would be more traditionally designed with more urban style parks. So this one really has a balanced design between these more organic shaped parks and more urban style parks. The land use plan is more balanced in concept 2. So it is about 50-50 residential and office. And we've also introduced a substantial institutional anchor, which is shown here in the dark blue. And I think that's what we'd really like some comments on today, is how you see this institutional and office component contributing to the innovation goals of the project. The other thing you'll notice here is the retail component is substantially larger than in concept 1. That is to provide that sub-regional entertainment and retail piece, which not only provides activities for the people that live and work here, but may draw people in from other places in the surrounding communities. In terms of cores and centers, this is a little more consolidated, this concept. So there's a clear hub, which is shown in the pink color. And that would really act as a focal point for the entire project, and would be complemented by smaller district subcenters. So these are what some imagery of what these either subcenters, or in this case, the entertainment and retail center, could start to be. It has a little, it's a little more ambitious in terms of its programming. So again, serving not only the residents and workers, but also the surrounding communities. And here's how that would begin to play out. We've actually looked at and thought about maybe a single entertainment component, like a small concert hall or concert venue, as part of this mix. In terms of the open space for concept 2, we have, as I mentioned, indicated a sub-regional park, which is labeled here Sports Park. This would be a community-based, primarily athletically oriented community park. You can see the fields shown on that, in that red area. But then complementing that would be this regional open space that cuts through the middle of the project and links up to a recreational trail, other recreational trails. And then what we're labeling the central greens or the district parks could then be programmed in certain ways to provide smaller types of functions, like basketball courts or other types of functions that don't require extensive acreage. So this concept relies on these slightly more urban parks. Here you see a picture of what one of these might look like, perhaps in the office district. They have, certain amenities that would really begin to create place. The regional connection that cuts through the middle of concept 2 might feel something like this. This is in Boise's downtown. They have a wonderful riverfront park. Also, you can see maybe there's an opportunity for grade separation where bike and pedestrian trails may pass under roads on the right-hand side here. Concept 2 has quite a robust road network, as do all of them, with the opportunity for these pink areas, which are, again, the car-free areas focused around the parks. The transit and micromobility strategy for concept 2 is a little different than concept 1. Here we went with a what we call an active mobility corridor, shown in yellow, and that would be a bike and pedestrian loop that essentially would unify the whole project together and allow people to commute either to work or back to their home, or even through the project from off-site on a bike way and pedestrian way that's separate from roads. As I mentioned, in concept 2, there is a institutional component or what we're calling an anchor tenant. This might be a university that has a presence here. It might be a research institution. It might be a governmental institution. We're not sure yet. We'd love to hear some feedback on that today. And it may be as minor as a couple floors in a building, or an institution may take a whole block or even a couple blocks. Again, you can see the primary school location here. We hope to link that to an open space so that children can get to school without necessarily having to drive or travel on a road. The research and institutional elements may look something like this. Maybe they're 1, 2, 3, 4 stories in height, but larger floor plates that have the capacity to be subdivided and incorporated into larger research and development goals. In terms of the design organization of concept 2, we essentially have a 2 core idea. So one on the right would be more driven by commercial uses such as office and research institutions. And then the second one along the linear park would be more entertainment focused. So a slightly different concept. And the one on the right would be organized around the BRT, which you see here in red. And in this concept, the BRT actually would travel down this boulevard that cuts through the middle of the project. We also think option 2 would be a great option to consider maybe a slightly higher density focal point. We call it the Hive. This could be a mixed use building that supports educational functions, tech incubator, and social hub, as well as other community-based events, and would act as an architectural signature for the project. Concept 3 is the economic catalyst. This one's also very exciting in that it has the broadest reach geographically of all the concepts, really looking out almost 20 miles in terms of its catchment and really providing a third focal point in the Wasatch Front together with Salt Lake and Provo, what we would maybe begin to consider an innovation business district. So it's a concept that really puts economic growth forward. And so the design really is focused on that end. So we see here, we have the highest percentage of commercial uses, about 256 acres of non-residential land uses. So a substantial portion of the site would be devoted to economically based land uses. Because of its more aggressive economic goals, it does have the least amount of open space. You can see that here. The gray areas are development areas, and the green, of course, are green spaces. The roads are white. About 60% of the site would be devoted to development, and about 20% open space. It also has the highest proportion of office and institutional uses. We have also indicated actually 2 institutional anchors here. So one, what we're calling an innovation accelerator in the north, and maybe that's oriented more around product development and incubation of new technologies. And then the one in the south, which may be more around research, education, and those types of functions. This is an example of the type of building we hope to attract here. This building in particular is from Mission Bay in California, has more of a life sciences mission. And what we've been hearing in the market is that the point could become a place where life sciences and technology begin to come together. As I think you probably all are aware, life science right now is extremely hot in terms of demand for new space around that particular land use. Concept 3 is really focused on a single clear center, or what we're calling the project core in this drawing. It would be complemented by a series of smaller subcenters, but really it's about building up and strengthening this idea of a single center anchored around a central park. The entertainment and retail would be focused in that same organizational idea. Because the open space is a little bit less than the other two concepts here, it does put a few more constraints on what we can do with it. So we're anticipating that we can achieve the regional trail connection through the site. And the remainder of the open space would be programmed mostly around specific functions that typically have a smaller footprint. So probably not large multi-purpose fields or soccer fields, but these are smaller multi-purpose fields that really serve the neighborhoods in which they're located. The Central Park, as I mentioned, is a key signature element of Concept 3. We see this as a very community-forward space that could accommodate a lot of different activities. We'll be lined by restaurants and other retail functions, but a very active and lively public space. So that's a key feature of Concept 3, along with an idea of green infrastructure, because the open space configuration in Concept 3 is more constrained. It does put a prerogative or an emphasis on green infrastructure strategies that perhaps help us manage stormwater and conserve water resources. Another advantage of Concept 3 is, in its current configuration, is a very large car-free project core. So again, a pedestrian-oriented central zone that supports the functions and retail that I just mentioned. What that allows us to do is have outdoor dining, much more flexibility in terms of how we program that car-free area. Do some micro-mobility, and in Concept 3, we're looking at two different options of a couple looping characteristics here. The institutional footprint in option 3 is fairly significant. It would be oriented more to the south around the prison site. And then again, you can see the school located more to the center of the residential. In that institutional, as I mentioned, could be more oriented towards an educational role or a student-based training and research mission. The physical form of Concept 3 is again oriented around this large central park, which you can see here in the center, and we would build the buildings up around that. So you have the highest buildings more at the center of the project. And when we turn the color on that open space, you can see that connection that would run through, and you can actually see the scale of that central park is pretty substantial. So there's a lot of different things we could do with that. Might be an outdoor performance area, it might have other community functions, and as I mentioned, retail and restaurants. So those are the three concepts as they stand today. So I'd be happy to take any questions you have on the physical layout or the characteristics of each of these three before we go into the analysis.
Peter, can you talk,
go ahead, Kelvin.
Can you talk just a little bit about the massing of the residential? Are we looking primarily at multifamily type housing units here, higher density housing, that kind of thing?
Yes. Generally, we're anticipating, and the massing here doesn't show the true intent. This really is what we call a test fit. So we're just seeing if the GFA fits. But there's a few blocks that I think do sort of represent what we're talking about. So typically, you know, it might be a perimeter building with a central parking structure. But these would typically be 2 and let's say 3 to 4 stories in height on average. But we are hoping to have a variety of housing types in the project. So everything from 3 and 4 story apartments, whether those are rental or for sale condos, to townhomes would be the next kind of density level down, and then possibly single family detached homes in a small portion of the area, but it would be detached homes that are quite close together, so pretty small footprint. Now, there may be opportunities in the district hubs, where, let's say we identify this area as sort of a focal point in the plan. We could go higher than that if the market allows, but generally right now the market is holding steady around 3- and 4-story apartments with structured parking. So that's what we're anticipating.
First, this is incredibly helpful, and I appreciate obviously a tremendous amount of work that's gone into it. All three concepts are incredibly exciting. I found myself with really strong reactions to each, some positive, some negative.
Good.
And so let me lead with a comment and then ask a question. And frankly, Alan, this might be more for you. The comment is, option 3 feels a lot like more of the same. It's, we've got this in Lehigh. We have something like this in Draper. We have something like this up at the U. There's stuff in Sandy. It's, let's promote growth. Let's go build our cookie cutter, 4- and 5-story buildings. We'll pack some together. We might sprinkle a few parks in here or there, but it's a lot of the same. And frankly, feels like more just blending into the sprawl than something really unique, which is this giant parcel of land that could become something incredibly special. My concern is that we just, as a state, have a natural tendency to gravitate toward that, and we end up with more of the same. Concept 2 is interesting. It's a little bit of the hybrid. Concept 1, to me, I found just kind of enthralled, Peter, as you described it, of wow, like there's nothing like that in Utah anywhere. It's special, and the unplanned collisions of people and ideas who live and work within this community, and yet with open ingress egress for others outside the community to come and be a part, could create something really unique and really special, but with great intentionality, and the same intentionality that you presented the design. My question is, how do communities decide which direction to go? How does our community decide which direction to go? What guidance have you received from the board? Because, I'm struck, we can offer comments on each of these, pros and cons and feedback on each of these designs, but they're fundamentally seeking to achieve entirely different objectives. And it doesn't seem worth spending time on providing feedback to others if there aren't in fact a clear set of objectives or a mandate given by the board. I don't actually know what that is.
Yeah, let me address that a little bit. And Chris, it's great. And the comments that you provided are just what we're looking for, to kind of identify the elements of these that make the most sense to move forward. And there are pluses and minuses, I think, on each of them.
Sure.
So we're not going to ask, pick 1, 2, or 3, but it's what elements do you like that ought to move forward. With respect to your question, we've been given some direction from the public and then from the legislature on what ought to happen here. And frankly, it's kind of an all of the above. The legislation talks about workforce development and job creation, quality of life, transportation, natural areas, open space, a balance of uses, research, etc. And so in reality, there are sometimes some trade-offs among those. And the next thing we're going to go into is the evaluation of how these ideas work relative to some of the quality of life measures that are important. And in terms of process, our board is going to be making a decision. They've seen just the beginning of these concepts, and we're going to be working with them for the next couple of weeks. So they're going to be relying a little bit on you to help us understand what are the trade-offs that make sense? What should the priorities be? And the comments that you made, Chris, I think are very, very helpful in that regard. So I know that's not a perfect answer, but we're trying to find that balance among the many objectives that have been outlined for us.
That's helpful. I appreciate that, Alan. You're right. There are clear trade-offs, and there are clear trade-offs of these, right? If we're throwing the magic wish list, I'd love to arrive to the community by flying unicorn. It's probably not achievable. My worry is that we will placate to the least common denominator at the end of the day, and special interests who have a loud voice and a vested economic interest in punching out some buildings and businesses who would like to co-locate as a function of that, but we'll lose what is a truly unique and arguably kind of once in a shot opportunity to build something completely differentiated that would drive extraordinary value for the community. And to me, some semblance of that concept one or concept one bleeding into concept two, because of the open spaces, because of that natural blend and harmony of mixed use, but with very deliberate corridors that can cater to very specific innovation objectives. So much of what we've spent the last 6 months talking about together as work groups is just really special. And so, a strong preference, but also just strong compliments to Peter and the team for some really marvelous work.
Well, we really appreciate those comments. That's helpful, and we don't want this to be business as usual. I think one thing I'd say in terms of process, at this point we're looking at big picture concept. Once we get into stage 3 and stage 4, as we start narrowing down to the preferred alternative, that's when we're going to really get into details that will help distinguish this site. And we'll want your input on that today and beyond. But wonderful comments, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks,
we do
Alan.
have 3 others that have raised their hand, and let's Brenner.
Thanks. I would just say that one of the things that I liked is you're looking for elements that we like. The central pathway in Regional Hub or Concept 2, I really like that pathway that's connecting the ridge to the river. Very cool concept. There's a lot of green space there that maybe I think you were talking about soccer fields and things like that, where we have a huge soccer complex maybe 7 minutes away. So I kind of like that central path, but I think I prefer the Central Park theme in Concept 3, where you've got much larger buildings. I've been a big fan of the higher density. And if you could get that higher density, yet still have the complete community, or at least the 15-minute city, that would be amazing. And I'd be an advocate for even larger buildings if the economics will support it. And I think that, 3 weeks ago, we had the lowest level of home inventory available in the history of the state, something like that. I mean, I find it hard to believe when the pioneers got here, there was nothing, but still, there's just no inventory of homes. So we're in this unique position where we can go up and do something unique, as Chris is saying, and really do something to differentiate. But as far as things that really caught my attention, that central path is awesome. And then the Central Park with the big buildings around it, I really like that look and feel.
Thanks, Brenner. And it's amazing. Since you grew that beard, you've got so much more credibility. I just believe everything you say more. Great. Thanks. Good points. Kelvin?
My member is going to say, I think we have here because this land is not owned by developers, it's owned by the state. We have to do some things that economic are to provide that Chris was talking about, and specifically doing in concept see more planned space. When I was mayor, we used to talk about open space all the time and green space and all, and sometimes it was thrown in just to be green space, just to say that you had it. But in this situation, we need to have intentionally planned open space that's designed to either accommodate the residential needs or the gathering spot needs for some of the commercial areas. And I would love to see that exploited even more, even at the expense of buildings, perhaps, just to create that environment. Because those are places where people can gather. Those are places where people can recreate, especially if they're in the residential areas. And I do agree with Brenner. I would love to see more density and taller buildings and more open space as a result of that. I think that would be something that would be unique, and have intentionally planned open, like the trail that goes through the middle.
Yeah.
That's really, in my opinion, the kind of thing that's going to set this apart, and to have designs where maybe, I know some people feel that the mixing residential and commercial has some benefit, but to me, if you really want to get the interactions going, somehow you need to have intentionally planned commercial areas that are going to interface, whereas the retail areas or the entertainment areas in one area, and have it maybe more segment. Maybe that's my age showing, but I think that gets you more utilitarian use out of it, especially if you can create more open space and walkability.
Really good thoughts. Really good thoughts. Thank you, Kelvin. And Will, dear.
Well, I'm going to switch my question because my sentiments, I think, are very similar to Brenner's and probably Kelvin's. So, Peter, I'm going to kind of do a switcher in terms of the questions. With respect, first of all, thank you, because these are very clear and beautifully done, in my opinion. For concept one, what is the kind of, is there a great example of a successful complete community that is somewhere in the US? And if so, can you just comment on, one or two of the critical success factors for making that complete community so successful?
Well, have you seen the summary we did of the analog projects?
If it was the last hour of our last meeting, I missed it because I had a conflict. But
okay. Let me see if I can call that up.
No, if you could just comment, because I assume then the fundamental assumption I'm making is there is a kind of a great example of a complete community, and maybe just comment on what are one or two of the critical success factors of it. And then my corollary question is, for concept, particularly for concept 2, or a version of or a merger of concept 2 and 3, why do those attempts, in our experiences in the US, why have they not succeeded? Okay, so success on one side, and then what would things be that did not occur, or were the reasons for failure or relative failure for a merger of concepts 2 and 3?
Can you just expand on that? What do you mean by the lack of success?
You talked about critical things for concept 2 and for concept 3. For example, concept 2, you have an institutional anchor. It could be a couple of floors, it could be an entire building.
Yeah,
there are clearly a couple of kind of anchors. One can imagine kind of an institutional educational anchor, and then maybe a therapeutics accelerator anchor or something in concept 3. I'm actually thinking about cities where they have tried to do either 2 or 3 and they have failed. And why have they failed?
Yeah, I think there's a couple important things that we learned by looking at both other innovation districts and then just projects in general, mixed use types of projects. One is the presence of an institutional partner. That seems to be a consistent and very important part of any innovation environment. They bring credibility, they bring money oftentimes, they bring the expertise and the scientific, again, integrity to a particular environment in which they're partnered. So that institutional presence is important. So that, for instance, is something, let's say we decide to move forward with concept 1, you would have to introduce that into the land use mix where it's not now. The second is a physical differentiation in the environment, which is, I think, what Chris was kind of getting to. It has to look and feel different from everything else. People who are in the tech and innovation space don't want to be like everybody else. That's just not in their DNA. So they look for environments that are uniquely different, that are amenitized differently, that have, and we were talking about that this morning with the team, is in an ironic way, to create an innovation district, you have to build all the other stuff that goes with it. You know, the housing, the after hours retail and entertainment, the open space that's so important to these tech workers and younger employees. So it has to look and feel different. It has to be amenitized differently. And then the other thing we learned is that you need to have a first phase or a first commitment that demonstrates what your intention is. So you need to have an early stage space, and I think that speaks to kind of concept 3. You know, you could build this district first, or a portion of it, and right away that starts to say what this project is about, what the standards are here. So having that early stage win, or that early stage commitment demonstrated is a very important part of the success of a district. So people get the message right away that this isn't like everywhere else, and if you want to come here, you know, here's the expectations. So those were a few of the things we learned. I don't know, Alan, if you want to add to that.
And how would you categorize Mission Bay, which is probably the one that I'm familiar with the most, which has, you know, the Warriors basketball arena right next to UCSF Medical Center.
Yeah.
So how, is that a 3 or a 2?
That's a good question. I think in intention, it would lean more towards 3, okay, where I find Mission Bay to be not an extremely pleasant physical environment to be in. I don't know how you feel about it. I mean, there's some nice parts to it, but for instance, there's not a major central green area or commercial hub that I know of. Now, I'm not 100% familiar with every nook and cranny of Mission Bay, but so I would say Mission Bay today leans more towards 3. Okay. However, I think we would want attributes of Mission Bay, but if we could marry it with, say, option 2, where there's a clear concept around public open space, or more variation in public open space, that would be ideal, right? So Mission Bay plus.
Is there a great example of option 1, Peter?
No, this is probably the most groundbreaking physical design. The idea of moving open space, not in option 3, which is more conventional, where the open space is in the middle of the project and you group things around it. Option 1 essentially flips that and says, let's use the open space to connect the whole project together as its own idea. And then the districts actually function almost as mini little villages or towns. And I think, as Chris was saying, you can then program and design these individually, so they could each have their own personality and mission. But as far as I know, this has never been done before. So just in terms of physical design, concept 1 is probably the most groundbreaking, even though it looks, you know, pretty reasonable, I think.
Let me jump in, and I may not have prerogative as a moderator here, but I'm going to exercise it anyway. And we haven't even gotten to the main presentation, which is to show you how these various concepts perform, which may have some impact on how you evaluate them. So I wonder if you'd indulge us enough to kind of go through and show you how they perform relative to various categories. And Peter, maybe we can go through this fairly quickly.
Sure. Yep, I'll try and. So a key task in stage 2 was then to evaluate the 3 concepts. And the basic methodology that we set out was to developed the framework plans. You just saw the three. We assigned different parameters to them. And then we performed a series of analytical tools on them. So we actually created or established 25 evaluation criteria, and those are listed here. Each of those criteria were organized into 5 groups. So transportation has 5 criteria: community, sustainability, open space, and economy. So we have 25 criteria, and we wanted to make sure that every evaluation criteria was as objective as possible. In other words, it had to be verifiable whether something performed better or not. And then we gave them a very simple ranking of 1, 2, 3. So we have 3 concepts. The one that did the best got a 3. The one that did the worst got a 1. So it's a pretty simple structure. And we can talk about the methodology, but what it did was it did provide a pretty clear evaluation process for us. So I'll go through these pretty quick. We can always loop back. So transportation really looked at several attributes. So here you can see the 3 schemes or 3 concepts, and this criteria, T1, measured daily external car trips. And as we anticipated and was proven by our transportation modeling, the complete community had the fewest external car trips. And that speaks to its more balanced land use approach by about 20,000 daily car trips. So that says that having a more balanced land use model reduces external car trips and subsequently would minimize or moderate air pollution or air quality. We've also provided a key takeaway at the top of each one if you want to just cut to the chase and see what the basic conclusion was. We also looked at intersection density. Now, this can be refined, but we just took the 3 concepts and analyzed them as they stand today. And concept 2, regional hub, had the most dense road network, which generated the most street intersections. Now, this is sort of a planning metric that planners use to calculate what we call porosity in the plan, meaning how easily can you move through the plan. So the conclusion is having more intersections increases connectivity and the porosity of development. So again, this is something we can tweak in the next stage. The third criteria is what we call internal capture. So this measures how much of a person's daily trips are met through internal land uses. In other words, trying to reduce the number of trips they have to make off the site. So the one with the highest amount of internal capture was option 2, and we asked ourselves why that was, and we think it was because of that more substantial retail and entertainment component in concept 2, and that provided just enough additional services to the people that live and work here that they don't have to leave the site. Criteria T4 was a plan's proclivity or ability to provide car-free areas. And we think this is just an important part of the vision, is not having the entire plan, of course, be car-free, but portions of it. And that contributes to the walkability and the uniqueness of it. In this instance, concept 3 performed the best. And that was based on that central park idea that also had the roads removed from that central zone. Criteria T5 was simply access to BRT. And in this evaluation, concept 2 performed the best, and we asked ourselves why that was. And what we think is that by the creation of a regional park of some sort, the size we can debate, But what that did was force a slightly more concentrated development footprint, and that improved access to BRT. The other interesting thing is that we did not have open space adjacent to the BRT line except in one area. And so we had more development closer to BRT. So that was kind of interesting. And I do want to say many times the performance of the three concepts was quite close, actually. So we feel confident that we can adjust any of the concepts to perform well under any of these criteria. We then rolled up those analytics into some preliminary recommendations. So around transportation, you can see them here. So residential land use, very important. Creating a smaller block size to facilitate connectivity, incorporating that regional retail mix, minimizing large open spaces near BRT, and then selectively eliminating some roads. The second set of metrics were focused on community. Now this had really to do with land use types and the idea of centers and how can I move through the project and meet my needs. In this option, this is access to retail. So taking the district centers and measuring how many people from the residential and mixed use land uses have access to those resources. And in this evaluation, concept 2 did again perform the highest. 100% of the residential and mixed use parcels have within a 5-minute walk of a regional, or sorry, of a district center. But again, the other ones are not performing badly, so we can easily make them perform at the same level. Criteria C2 looked at jobs housing balance. Now, why this is important is it reduces external people traveling on the site to go to their job. So again, reduces offsite traffic. And one of our team members was saying that generally the jobs housing balance in Seattle and Utah as a whole is around 1.5. So you can see here we have about 31,000 jobs and we're proposing about 7,200 households. So the jobs per household is about 4.39. So that's about twice as much for this project as in the Wasatch Front as a whole. So short story is we have a lot more jobs than we have households, and that proportion increases as you move to the right. So in this instance, we want this number as close to as low as possible. So concept 1 performed the best. The next couple really have to do with access to the district centers. So again, this is how much land is adjacent to these district centers. So before we looked at residential, now we're looking at all the land in total. And again, number 2 performs the best. And and then the third is a similar metric, just how close everybody is to the project center. And again, in number 2, that was the highest performer. Why this is important is it just really has to do with the coalescence of the scheme, the concept of a single identity for the project and how connected people feel to that. So the more compact the development footprint, the more we believe people will feel an affiliation with this with the project. And then the 5th criteria looked at simply the acreage of commercial and hotel functions. And as we discussed earlier, concept 2 has the highest gross acreage of retail, which contributed to the reduction of offsite trips. So that scored the highest. So the preliminary recommendations for the community aspects are to maintain the residential and non-residential mix, implement and create the best proportion of jobs to housing possible, create multiple district-based subcenters, and then concentrate the development footprint to maximize links to the project center, and then include a significant retail and entertainment component. And again, feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. I'll go a little bit quicker. The third tranche of criteria have to do with sustainability. We looked at solar access. This speaks to our sustainable mission. This is really dependent on final building design, so we feel like it's something that can be optimized in stage 3, but due to the test fit that we conducted, concept 2 did perform the best in both categories, daylight access. So this has to do with the building heights, the building depths, and floor-to-floor heights. And again, something we'll further refine an option in stage 3. The third sustainable criteria is regional vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. VMT is just what it sounds like. It's how many overall miles will the residents and users of this project and people that might work here travel. In other words, how much traffic and miles are being generated because of this project. So you can see in this option, they are all extremely close. Actually, they're all at about 87.9 million vehicle miles traveled. But concept 1 was just slightly better, but I think it's really almost negligible. And that speaks to me, at least, that the basic land use program of 50% resi, 50% commercial basically is, when you look at it in terms of regional impacts, there's not that much difference between the 3 concepts. Criteria 4 had to do with the ability of the project to conserve water and manage stormwater. And as I mentioned, concept 1 was really designed with that goal in mind. That was one of the key formative drivers of this idea. So that actually did perform the best in terms of water conservation and the potential for the project to reduce costs through stormwater. And then the 5th and final sustainability criteria had to do with bike and pedestrian connectivity. And this was kind of an interesting analytical tool. We just divided the site up into 350 by 350 foot squares. We then analyzed how easy it was to move from any one square to another square using the roads, sidewalks, or trails. And that produced these heat maps. And the more reddish hue indicates that these are the segments of the plan that have the highest degree of connectivity, and the blue and gray indicate the lowest points of connectivity to other parcels. Again, option or concept 1 performed slightly better than the others, but we feel pretty comfortable we can design for optimized connectivity in all the options. So some preliminary recommendations on sustainability is building orientation and design really will be a stage 3 refinement, but still important. Maintaining the residential, non-residential land use mix. For a portion of the open space should be designed to accommodate overland water flow, and that all the options should be designed for full and seamless connectivity between the trail system and the sidewalks. The 4th set of criteria had to do with open space, and here we measured distance to open space, OS1. And as we anticipated, because of the extensive and more linear nature of the open spaces in concept 1, that performed the best. So anywhere you are in the project, you're never more than 113 feet from some sort of open space, which is fantastic. And the other ones were right behind. So, these are pretty minor differences again, and can be designed to perform better. One of the more, I think, useful criteria was how you program the open space. And I think somebody was speaking to this earlier. We felt that concept 2 had the highest programming flexibility, meaning that because it had both linear open spaces and more urban style parks, and then also the regional sports component, that gave you the highest flexibility in terms of how to program the open space. And that speaks to the intention behind the types of open spaces we're creating. Criteria 3 had to do with trail connectivity. Concept 1 performed the best, again, because of those linear open spaces. In terms of ecology and biodiversity potential, the team feels pretty strongly that these more linear spaces that divide districts perform better from an ecology and biodiversity potential. So 1 and 2 are performing the best, but 2, because of its configuration, we felt had the highest potential. And then the final open space was proximity to open space. So this is a little different than distance. This just measured how much of the project is within 200 feet of open space. And this really speaks to more quality of life and just adjacency and amenity for the people that live and work here. But here, again, pretty close, but concept 1 did perform the best. So these were our recommendations. Really came down to maintaining the diversity of the open space strategy. So it's not just about quantity, I think, as Kelvin was mentioning, but what the purpose is of every open space. So we will design those to be purposeful and intentional in the next round. And then establishing, native landscapes and other attributes of the design. The final category of criteria was the economic evaluation. And this had to do with 4 criteria in this instance. So 1 was parcel frontage on open space. Now we know that parcels that front onto public parks have a sales and rental premium. So one economic strategy is to maximize that frontage. So in this case, concept 2 performed the best, but they all do pretty well. A second economic indicator is the residential quantity and variety. We know from research on other parks and what we're hearing anecdotally from, other projects, and what we're hearing anecdotally from developers is proximity and variety of residential offerings really contributes to the success of mixed-use projects. In other words, you need to have a residential units that are affordable, that people might purchase at different stages in their lives. So we're hoping the variety could be sufficient that people might choose to live here for 3, 4, maybe even 5, 10 years. The 4th criteria is simply the institutional capacity. So we know from our analog study that institutional presence is important. Because we have the luxury of a fairly high amount of acreage to use, we do believe that having a significant economic and institutional footprint on the site is to the economic advantage of the project. And then, of course, the corollary to that would then be supporting office development. So in concept 3, of course, being the most assertive economically, we do have the highest amount of office development, 145 acres. So that one rated the highest. We then were able to summarize all of this in a chart. Here are the preliminary recommendations around economy. So having that open space really not only be programmed well, but touching the greatest amount of parcels, and then committing in a very intentional way around variety of housing, institutional presence, and maximizing office development is to the greatest extent possible. We then, as I mentioned, gave each one of these a simple score, which indicated their performance against the 25 metrics. And you can see we then scored each of them according to the tranche that was being analyzed, so transportation community. The green indicates the highest performer, the red indicates the lowest performer. So you can see that concept 2 or alternate 2 actually performed the highest in 4 out of the 5 categories, was tied in open space with concept 1. And then around economy, concept 3 performed the best, which is no surprise since that was what it was intended to do. Bottom line is that concept 2 emerged with consistently the highest scoring across all the criteria. Concept 1 had the second highest score, and concept 3 had the third highest score. Now, again, I do want to stress that many of the criteria yielded results that were very close, and the scoring methodology in a certain way exacerbated or enhanced the differences between the schemes. Even though they might have been very close, the scoring system sort of made them look less close. So happy to take any questions on that. I'll come back to this slide. So you can see that there's a lot of moving parts in terms of the design, but we do feel comfortable and confident that many of the best performing attributes of the different options can be combined in the next stage.
Let me just jump in quickly. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. And we want to make sure that there's time for you to give us input, but I'll just say, we don't look at this as a scoring exercise and aren't going to just add up the numbers and say that makes the decision, for a couple of reasons. One, as Peter said, a lot of these scenarios perform very closely within one or a handful of percentage points. And yet when you do 1, 2, 3, it can exaggerate it to suggest a 30% difference. So we recognize that. We also recognize that these criteria are not weighted. Some are more important than others, depending on who you talk to. So we understand that there's a weighting that has to take place. But having said that, it does give us a little idea of the relative benefits of these concepts, and importantly, those lessons that we wrote down. Let's just kind of get your input now again on elements of each of these concepts that you liked that ought to move forward in our process, or things that you did not like that maybe shouldn't go forward.
Just maybe I could point out a couple of variations here. I mean, this working group is the Educational Research and Innovation Working Group. So, there's an assumed theme here. And, just point out one of the interesting things about the third scheme, and it could, again, occur on any of the schemes, but the idea is it has a fairly large single campus that would be focused on a single sort of industry. Let's say biotech, for instance. And you can see that in kind of the bottom right-hand corner, and that assumes that there would be a innovation hub and labs and various other support facilities, and a spin-off of companies, new business formation companies, as well as other institutional partners organized around a single sort of industry focus. And then if you move up to the upper right-hand corner of alternative 3, you see it's more of a larger campus, because they actually don't have the same balance of 50% housing and 50% jobs. Number 3 has an emphasis of more employment and more office space than the other two. That's the whole point of it being an economic catalyst. And the upper right-hand corner would be a second innovation hub that would be focused on multiple industries. It would just be an incubator, accelerator, capital formation access center that would and certain type, maybe shared workspace and support facilities that would be multi industry focused. And again, that can be supplanted on any of these schemes, but for this particular working group, wanted to just point out that difference as a component that isn't necessarily found in the others.
Steve, this is Dave. I really appreciate you pointing that out, and I think that would be one concept that I'd want to move forward with, which into any 3 of these as we move forward from the educational side and the research standpoint.
The other thing that now 2, on the other hand, has this entertainment cultural hub, that is really pretty powerful. I mean, we've got in that program a 3,500 seat performance center. We have an esports center and arena. There's a whole array of live entertainment and more. I hate to use the word adult entertainment. It doesn't sound right, but I mean, not convention, not just your typical cinema and fast food chain and restaurants, but live performance, cultural, and the idea being that again, if we're drawing in a workforce, a national, if not international workforce of STEM workers, high education professional, because these days, it used to be, the workers followed the companies, and now if you look at Nashville, if you look at Austin, the companies now are following the workers. And so the idea is, if we can create an attraction for high quality workforce to continue their in-migration, even accelerate it into the region, we're going to be more successful at bringing in, more companies. So, I mean, that's kind of an exciting thing about 2 that maybe, I would emphasize a little bit more. And the other idea on 2 that I think is really interesting is, one of the trends, if you look at Atlanta 2030 planning, you look at LA 2050 planning, these futuristic planning exercises that cities are doing around the country and the globe, one of the patterns you see is trying to reintroduce green infrastructure into the fabric of the city, because it's been lost for the last 50 years. We pushed all the open space to the outside, concreted up the rivers, and now, as you're doing with the Jordan River, sort of rediscovering it and establishing it as an ecological and recreational resource, 2 takes the Jordan River and really extends it, into the center of the project in a way that is actually quite innovative, and quite progressive. Whereas 3 doesn't do that as much, but it has, I think, in just my opinion, the highest level of connectivity of these outlying districts into a central core, and that central core is like, I'm going to say it's kind of on steroids in the scheme. We're taking density from the surrounding areas, pushing it into the center. You can kind of start to see that with the massing, and it has this central park, which if we're looking for a wow factor, It could have water, it could have day use areas, it could have a huge amphitheater for major concerts and celebrations. It would be a very European kind of central park surrounded by, quite a bit of density. Scheme 2, on the other hand, has the same opportunity, only in a more linear manner, going through a sort of a downtown CBD area, although it's not quite as emphasized as much as on alternative 3. If our land development strategy is that we're going to carve off districts, and different master developers will take individual districts that are most aligned with their expertise. Some districts will be more innovation and office, so an office master developer would align the most with that. Others might be more housing, so a housing master developer might align more with that. Concept 1 is the cleanest and clearest, in terms of a diagram, to be able to do that, because the districts are so clearly demarked and separated by open space, which makes it, in terms of going out to the development world, probably the most simplest equation of breaking up the site and having it be incrementally developed by individual master developers. So I don't know, that's just some additional color that might help a little bit.
Thanks, Steve. That provides some really good context. Keith Mormer, you've had your hand up for a while.
My virtual hand.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alan. There seems to be a lot of conversation. It feels like there's this healthy tension between sort of this community focus or this industry focus. In listening, there's something that sort of bubbles up for me that I see as an interesting mix that I think we can potentially bring to the fore on concept 3, which is if you've got a higher ed anchor that's driving innovation, and you've got, say, for example, a K-12 educational presence, the proximity and the planning that could be had here creates a very interesting workforce development opportunity that exists at scale in a way that I think would be truly unique. Whether you have one industry or several industries present in the park, I think you've got a situation where families that would live in this community will be able to have their kids going to school in an environment where the hands-on learning, the apprenticeship opportunities, and true learning, what the next generation of the workforce will need to look like, and have sort of a front and center experience for it. I'm not aware, and maybe others are, but I'm not aware of another environment that could be created with that sort of intention. And I think that, again, bringing it around, choosing between whether you've got more of a community focus or an industry focus, to me, that seems like an opportunity to get the best of both worlds.
Really good thoughts. And I know this group has talked for some time about the opportunity to kind of create K through 16 educational opportunities and new approaches to education, and getting young people involved in after school programs and training. And I think you're right. There's an opportunity for a lot of creativity there. Thank you, Keith. I know that Donna, you had asked a question on chat earlier, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask that of the broader group, and then Representative Handy and Kelvin Cullimore. So, Donna, do you want to raise your concept with everybody?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Alan. And as everybody said, some really great innovative concepts here. And I agree that there's some awesome innovation in going a little taller and having an anchor as we talk about higher ed. Keith made a great point about that. And I'm just looking at kind of this discussion between a Central Park area and this sports complex kind of off to the side, and looking at how well number 2 did on a lot of things that we're talking about. It still has an anchor, it still has these opportunities. But I also agree that we have a lot of sports complexes around in this southern part of the valley. So I didn't know if there was something driving soccer fields or if there are other uses that could translate from the central park to, you know, some of the green space in number 2 and marry, you know, two things that were kind of exciting for everybody. I think the anchor and the linear space and the water. I'm worried about the water, actually. I think we really need to pay attention to that part, and 2 performed pretty well there.
No question. Peter, maybe you could talk a little bit about the research that your team did about needs in the area, why we're looking at potentially activated space and the flexibility that may be there to do something different.
In terms of that regional.
Yes.
Regional park.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me, sorry, let me just escape here for a second. I think probably where the team is headed is to modify the character of that park. One thing we've been hearing loud and clear from the public is they want open space. One of the things we've been hearing from elected leaders and city leaders is they want economic development. So we're trying to find the right balance. Let me just jump to number 2 here. And while we certainly don't want to duplicate or create another, you know, major soccer complex or anything like that, there is a reoccurring and a reoccurring desire for some sort of programmed open space, but also supported by the analysis we did of the immediately surrounding areas. So even though there might be a soccer element or soccer complex within 5 or 7 miles, in the immediate area, there's not a lot of recreational opportunities. I'm talking about in that sort of 1 to 2 mile catchment. So I think probably where we're headed is to still have a some sort of sports park, but probably smaller than this, slightly smaller. And these would not be lighted fields necessarily for, you know, intense soccer events or place tournaments, but something more informal than that. So they might even be only striped on certain days. There might be fewer of them. They may not be striped at all, and they're simply set up as very informal fields. So I think what you're seeing here in option 2 is maybe a little larger than where we're going, but still having a programmable open space that you can point to and say this is a recreational amenity for the immediately surrounding area.
We have had some specific proposals coming in to look at these kinds of things. And again, you kind of look at these different scenarios as test cases, just to test different ideas. And some will go forward and some will. Representative Handy.
Yeah, thanks everyone. This is I was going to bring this up to you, Alan, offline, but this seems to be an appropriate time to do it because Peter was talking about earlier in the presentation about sustainability issues regarding on the site. Well, Utah has a tremendous geothermal assets. Alan, you know probably Dr. Joe Moore at the University of Utah. He runs the Energy and Geoscience Institute. They are running a $200 million geothermal U.S. Department of Energy demonstration site in the western edges of our state. And he mentioned offhand in a briefing that I had with him last Friday that there are some assets on this site, some geothermal site assets. Now, he said, Alan, and we need to look into this to see how extensive they are or how they could be developed or could be additionally developed. But he said that they're heating the prison with these geothermal assets on the site. So I don't know anything about that, but I think that is an important aspect and element that we ought to consider, in all of this going forward. So I just kind of raised that as by way of information. I don't know what I don't know, but we can dig in and find out. Alan, does that make sense? Had you ever heard that before, Alan?
I have, and we've been looking at that carefully.
Okay,
that the prison does use an on-site geothermal resource for part of its heating. It's a limited resource. There's not a lot of it, and I think it only gets up to about 185 degrees. But yeah, we think that we can use that to minimize energy use at the site, or at least generate some heating without using different types of energy generation.
Well, I just brought that up, and yeah, good. And we can go more on that. And at least Peter ought to have that, at least, thinking about that a little bit as they're going forward. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Okay, I think we had Kelvin and then Brenner.
Yeah, so Alan, to your point earlier, it's important to remember these are not linear choices. I mean, these are just illustrations of different approaches, and we can combine the best of many of these. And to me, I like the economic development approach, but it is woefully deficient of the green space and the gathering I mentioned earlier. So I just wanted to reemphasize, I really think density is the answer to achieving the outcomes that everybody is looking for here, because you can get a lot of the segregation that you get in the complete community or the open space and ecological benefits of the regional hub imbued into concept 3 if we are brave enough to go for some higher density both in the housing and the commercial development in favor of creating more open space and the kind of elements that are generated in 1 and 2. So I know that's a little bit of a repetition of what I said earlier, but I just want to emphasize that I really think that we can achieve what we are looking for here by going that route.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kelvin. And I think there are a lot of us that would love to see higher buildings closer together, freeing up some open space, those kinds of things. And those are certainly things that we're all exploring. We are a little constrained by the market and rents that can be charged based on land values. And so we're kind of looking at a range of development approaches that we hope will lead to increasing the land values here to the point that rents could justify the more expensive building types that it takes to increase height. So we're dealing with, we want to be able to have a program and a plan that developers can actually build. I would say that we've got to be practical, but really push the envelope as best we can. And I think most of us would expect that over time, the economics are going to change and justify higher buildings. So as we build and as we plan, we want to be really flexible so that we're not constraining future opportunities for that more intensive development that we think will come.
Yeah, and I think one of the public oppositions to taller buildings is what it does to viewscapes and things. We have a unique opportunity here to cluster those in a way that does not affect those. And so really the driver becomes the economic elements that you're talking about, Alan, as opposed to public opposition to those kinds of things. So, I also would just, one last comment is, I would really advocate that the board, as they look at this, because there's no question, someone mentioned this earlier, a version of this, as we get closer to the end of the more specific planning, there's going to be the temptation to tinker with the political elements that come into it, all of that. It's really going to be important that we get our board to really hold the line on the vision of what this can be.
How cynical, Kelvin. There's no politics in this project.
Sorry. After 13 years as mayor, I just saw that way too often. So
yeah, no, it's such a good point. It's such a good point, and it is going to take some will to make sure we do this right. Thank you, Brenner, and then Donna.
Thanks. Just a couple of quick comments. One is, as we're talking about open space and green space, one of the reasons I love that large thoroughfare through the middle is because that provides access to this amazing resource of open space. I live on that Jordan River Trail, probably 5 miles north of there, and it's an amazing resource. There's so much open space there, and so I'm a fan for trying to maybe utilize that green space or that open space for something slightly different. Meaning, as was mentioned by the representative, we've got this resource of warm water. So there's a geothermal opportunity to educate, right? So maybe there's parks that showcase, here's what solar can do and here's what geothermal can do. So the green space isn't just a big soccer field, which we have Galena Park, which is not very far away, which is striped and ready for all of that. Anyway, so I think that if we get creative with the utilization of that open space, that keeps it in line with the vision of innovation. It's an innovation hub. So let's create opportunities to innovate, create educational opportunities to share what type of innovation is out there, and kind of become a laboratory for some of those clean techs, rather than just being a lot more grass that we need to water and mow and try and fight people's allergies. So we're just giving people more drugs, right? So that's just one of the pieces that I think it's important that we look at the green space. I don't think we need a ton because we've got a lot that's right there. There might have been a public bias that comes from Draper that has big green open areas, but they're the golf course and they're kind of spread out. So the central, I would call it the old farmland of Draper, has a bias to want more green space because there isn't a lot there in the middle. But there's this great resource next to us that we don't need to lose the 700 acres or too much of the 700 acres to green space because of the proximity. That's all I had.
Excellent. Thank you. Donna?
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out if I missed something, Alan, but have we really talked about numbers of people living in this space? Like how many people we're adding? Because as you were talking about, as we talked about this green space and the soccer fields and other things, it's one thing if you're putting, 5 or 10, thousand people there. It's another if you're creating a community that's, needing to be more self-sustaining in those ways, because I think depending on the density that we pick and how many people are living in that space, access to those kinds of amenities 7 or 8 minutes away are not the same, because those are being used by the communities that are there as well. And I agree with Brenner. I think it would be fantastic if we use the open space educationally. I'm just wondering if we have any statistics on, of the 3 plans, what the populations might be. Did I miss populations?
Yeah, I don't think we showed that specifically. We do have some projections for each of them, and it's been a while since I've seen them, so I'll ask my team to address that. But it seemed to me that it was kind of 12 to 15,000 residents.
Which is a significant amount of people to use a sports complex.
It's a big group.
Like, especially with the demographics we have in our state. And I also think we talked about concept 1 kind of being innovative in the way it uses space and the districts. And I think this community, well, this working group is very interested in innovation and research and having that institutional anchor. But also the possibility of maybe putting an institutional anchor in a district or having an innovation district that is its own district surrounded. So those individual concept districts shouldn't just be kind of thrown off to the side because they don't have an institutional anchor, because I think we talk a lot about green space, but that's a really innovative concept. And like you've said, I haven't seen that in this region of the United States. And so if we could take what we like about the economic model and add elements in a district of the complete community, it could be a very interesting marriage of those 2.
Yeah, what a good thought. Yeah, those are great thoughts. And one of the things that we've said is that any of these concepts, all of the concepts we intend will be innovation communities. And that means a mix of uses and different things. And we very much expect that there will be innovation districts in any of them.
Yeah.
But having said that, we are interested in your thoughts on the right framework, kind of where we start. And maybe you can look at it as which of these is the Christmas tree that we start hanging the different ornaments on. So would like some input there. The other thing is our time is limited, and we did have a second piece. And I think maybe, Peter, what we could do is if you could just go directly to the KVE on innovation,
Yeah,
and kind of show how we've incorporated their earlier concepts and ideas, and then see if there's anything that they might want to add at this point. I see, Brenner, you're suggesting that concept 2 is kind of the framework that you like, and use that as a starting point for building some of or building in the features and amenities that we've talked about. Thank you for that input. Peter, you want to just go through that real quick and then see if they have any comments or additions?
Yeah, so I think everybody has seen some version of this slide before. And let me just jump back for a minute and explain kind of how these are related. So the red is key vision elements. We see those really as aspirational. The sustainable metrics are more performative, and then we have smart city initiatives that are more operational. So what we've begun to do is take each of the KVEs, which you see on the left, and I'll just move to the innovation one. We have principles that were extracted from the innovation thesis statement. And then I believe partially with this group, we've been working on what the specific initiatives are that we want to see. So if there's any further ideas that you have, and I would say, don't be afraid to be specific. Don't be afraid to shoot for the moon here. If there's something really that you feel must be in this project or should not be in this project, we should get that on the table now, because stage 3 of the work will really be taking these initiatives and testing them and daylighting them in the plan in specific ways. So one of the goals for today was just to kind of take a second look at the initiatives and, make sure that we are beginning to account for the things we really want to see here. So I'll just open it up to any thoughts around that topic.
Take a second, kind of look over those and let us know if we're missing something. There's something you'd like to see incorporated as part of our phase 3 and phase 4. This is a good time for us to pick your expert brains to get it.
Is there anything, when you think of an innovation district, is there anything that we just have to have here that it would not be an innovation district without? I've heard some great ideas around education, K through 16, workforce development. Those are the types of great ideas we're looking for.
Alan, I don't know if you have other hands up.
Yeah, please.
This is Donna. I was in that.
People actually raising their hands. I don't know what to do with that.
I forgot to lower mine, so I'll just talk on since it was up. We talked a lot about lowering the barriers to bring in companies and other groups that bring cultural diversity. As we talk about attracting outstanding talent and investment, I think it can't be an innovation hub if it looks like everywhere else. So when we talk about elements we need, and education, absolutely, opportunities, a collision of industry and education together, super exciting for us. But I do want to just point out that we spent quite a bit of time in this discussion in the smaller group the last time, talking about how we lower the barriers and invite companies that have cultural diversity, and we increase the cultural diversity in this area.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah, we've got that in that third box down as being an important piece, and I appreciate you reminding us of that. And this group has had a number of conversations on this topic, and so we're kind of squeezing that rock, but this won't be the last opportunity either. We want you to continue to think about it, but for this to be distinct, different, a place that's distinguished around the world, we want to make sure that we're capturing up front some of those concepts and really giving them serious thought as we get into more detailed planning. Thank you. Love that. Got Nathan and then Brenner.
Yeah, Alan, one of the things that we had talked about a little bit before is what the brand of the area might look like, that can help innovation when you talk about the brands, whether it's a Silicon Slope brand or what the brand of this particular area is. I'm sure that fits in one of these topics, but I don't see it expressly. You might want to just address that or maybe think about that.
Yeah, thank you. That's not something that we've given a lot of time to discussing, but marketing this area is going to be a big deal, and branding is part of that. Thank you, Nathan. Brenner, if your wife hasn't beat you up yet, what do you have to say?
I was just going to mention that, Don, I think maybe your team came back with not just unique ways to collaborate between academics and industry, but actual incentives. And I really like that line of thinking you went through, that there's a block of land that there are incentives for businesses that are aligned with the universities that already exist to be able to take that land. So maybe we could get a little bit stronger about the wording on that specific piece, where it's not just create unique alliances, but create unique incentives to form those alliances.
Great.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Love it. What else? Anything else missing here? Okay. We'll give you, before we wrap up, want to give you a last opportunity for open comments. Anything else that you want to weigh in on? Anybody else that wants to weigh in on, kind of the urban form in any of those concepts that we can use as a starting point for our next round, or anything additional you would suggest that we pass on as recommendations to our board?
Alan, one other thing I don't know that we've talked a ton about in some of your space you have, but we have a heavy winter sometimes in Utah. And I was thinking about Iowa and some of the things they've done in the downtown to try to have those connected facilities where people can move from one facility to another at that second and third level rather than on the ground level. And don't know if that's been discussed about portions of the layout there, but there's some of the components that you showed in some of these examples where there might be some value to that. It might bring some value that we want to consider. It could also help with the safety component when we're talking about addressing different users on the street. You don't have as many walkers interacting with bikers at that point, that type of thing.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. That is an idea that's come up a little bit in the past, and something that's worth keeping on our list. I appreciate that. I lived in Calgary for a while in Canada, and their downtown was connected at the second or third story and really made it nice during the cold winter. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see. I've got some hands up. I don't know if they're leftovers from before or new comments, but Kelvin?
One thing, I don't know if this is the right time to mention it, but we had discussed in the past that, if we're looking at trying to support biotech kinds of things in an environment like this, you might need kind of a boutique hospital that would be something that could be facilitate needs of the residents there, but could also be used as a research institution of some kind, doing clinical trials or things like that, either associated with the U or as a standalone kind of an operation. And that's something that I think ought to be thought about.
It's very much on our minds, Kelvin. We agree. I think that would be a critical component of creating the ecosystem that we're looking for. So a very good reminder. Thanks. Donna, did you have something more?
Yeah, just kind of borrowing from what Kelvin was saying earlier about that political pressure. I think we want to be careful not to over-prescribe the innovation. And I think creating parameters where we could vet opportunities for those developing and open doors for innovation. I know how we can get sometimes where we over-prescribe what we want to have happen in a space. And particularly in committee and in politics, you can, it's just that warning about the over-prescribing what we want. We want a good balance of what we have available now and what we could build on in the future. But I think vetting parameters are going to be really important, if that makes any sense.
I think it does. You're kind of saying, on one hand, we don't want to narrow the focus too much and say we're only going to look at innovation in area X, but recognizing that really at the heart of innovation is freedom and flexibility, and being able to look at the intersection of different industry sectors and be a little bit creative. So
yeah, I
think that's what I hear. But.
Yes, and if we're too flexible, then we don't have enough parameters. So I think you do need some vetting up. You need some parameters and some vetting, and we talked about in our group, starting with what we're good at here in Utah, and looking at, what collisions that has, like you said, where does that cross over in industries that may be a new idea for us. But yeah, I worry about too many cooks in the kitchen prescribing what each parcel or piece or things happen to. So I know that's a concern.
It is, and I'm glad you raised that, because one of the things we've got to think about is whether we come up with a design and say we're going to build that, or if it just happens organically based on interest and investment. And it's probably a combination of those things. And I'm certainly not an expert in it, but would welcome any ideas on what those parameters look like.
I think that's why the institutional anchor is so popular, because I think that's a good mix of creating some prescription in one area and allowing innovation to grow up around it. So you have some open fields, but you also have some prescribed fields.
Yeah. Really good point. Really good point. Thanks. Nathan? I see, Nathan, there's a hand up. I don't know if that was intended or not.
Sorry, I think I left it up from last time.
Okay, then you lose a turn next time. That's the rule.
Let me get that down.
That's great. But well, listen, our time's about up, and we want to be respectful of your time. But if there's anything else, we certainly would welcome the comments. These have been tremendously helpful, really substantive thoughts. Anything else? Okay. Then let me just kind of wrap up briefly and again say thank you. This group working on innovation has been one of my favorites, because you've been so engaged and so thoughtful and specific in your ideas, and it's given us a lot that's actionable that we can work on. So we're excited to move forward. There's a commitment here that whatever we do is going to be an innovation community. And we want to bring in those elements that create that culture of creativity that you talked about. So we'll be back to you at the next Milestone workshop, where we will have in place a preferred alternative. So we'll start narrowing things a little bit there, and then get your ideas on how we tweak it and optimize it and get it in a form that can become our framework master plan. So can't thank you enough. Always good to be with you. Take care, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, Alan, and really like the hive concept, by the way, but you might expect me to say that.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody knew that was stolen from BioHive, right? Complimentary, yeah. Complimentary, yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody.